Hello and welcome to 5 Big Content Mistakes Solved, a webinar with Zoom Software and the Content Wrangler and a representative from Zerto. We're going to talk today about a few of the common product content mistakes that are frustrating to consumers and that actually damage their customer experience. But before we do that, let's meet our panelists today. My name is Scott Abel, and I'll be the host of today's show. I don't know if you can see me or not. Hopefully you can. So my name is Scott Abel. I'm a content wrangler. And today I serve as the host of the show, but also as a guest. And we've got 3 additional guests with us. Each of them will tell a little bit about themselves. Our first guest is Amy. Amy, could you tell the audience who you are and what you do for a living and your connection to today's topic?
Yeah, so I'm Amy Bowman. I've been in the documentation industry for my whole career. I won't say how many years. And I've been a doc manager and a tech writer. So I've also done a lot of information architecture and content strategy. I work with Zoomin, and I've been doing customer success. So I've been talking to a lot of customers about all their documentation, problems and how to solve them. So I'm coming to the webinar with those perspectives.
Excellent. And Steve, tell us a little bit about yourself and your connection to today's topic.
Thanks, Scott. I'm Steve Moldenhauer, and I lead the solution architecture team here at Zoomin, which means I get to go off and help customers solve exciting problems every day. I have been in the content space. I'm not afraid. 30 years in tech. So
you beat me just by a year, but you beat me. Excellent. Leah, tell us a little bit about yourself and your connection to today's topic.
Sure. I'm Leah Goldman. I've also been in the content space for a long time. Like Amy, I'm not going to say how long. I've worked both as a tech writer, content strategist, and documentation manager. I'm currently the documentation manager at Zerto, an HPE company. And in this role, I have built knowledge platforms, documentation centers, both for Zerto and for previous companies.
Lovely. And just for context, could you help our audience understand what does Zerto do? What's the main purpose of the company?
Sure. Zerto is in the IT space. They are the leaders in disaster recovery.
And that is a business critical function right now. So I bet you've got tons of work to keep you busy, especially as the cybersecurity industry and risk management industries are on heightened alert at all times. So you've got all kinds of content challenges, I'm sure. I'm so glad to have you join us today. Before we start, let's take a poll. I will ask our webinar producer if they could put the poll up onto the screen. This will be a multiple choice poll. It's very easy to participate. Read the question and you'll select one answer from the boxes that will be presented to you. And the question today that we're hoping that you'll answer is, how satisfied are your customers with your current technical product information knowledge center? So your portal where your customers go. How excited are you? Are they extremely satisfied with the work that you've provided? Or do you think that they're sort of satisfied, or just satisfied, or dissatisfied in some regard? Go ahead and click the answer that best fits your situation, and that'll help us see a little bit about the audience today. So we want to know about satisfaction because, of course, we all want to do the best job possible. And today we're going to share with you a couple of tips, and they're by no means the only improvements that could be made to a knowledge center, but there's some of the common ones. It looks like many of you think that your customers are satisfied, about half of you. A couple of you are actually very confident about how satisfied people are. And that's great to see that you're extremely or sort of satisfied, and sort of dissatisfied around 30%. This makes a lot of sense given the research that we've seen over the last few years. Customers are certainly in control, and they have experiences outside of our knowledge centers that they remember. And if they like them, then they hope that all experiences are similar and that they have similar kinds of great experiences. But in knowledge centers, they don't always have that. And so we're going to share a few tips with you today that might be able to help you build a better knowledge center and increase your satisfaction. All right, let's start with the first mistake. And I will actually talk a little bit about this. And I'd encourage the audience members, if you'd like, to submit a question using the chat function. And we'll take as many questions as possible at the end of the show. All right, big mistake number one is really too many choices. Obviously, we've all had this as a human, as a consumer, where we were overwhelmed with the number of choices. And it turns out that neuroscientists study this and they call it the paradox of choice. You can see the definition here is as the number of choices increases, so does the effort required of your site visitor to collect that information and make good decisions about what it is they're searching for. This is really important for us because it's not really about having too many words. It's about thinking about how much work are we making it for the consumer to find what they need. And if you have too many choices, that can get in the way. All right, if we'll advance to the next slide, let's take a look at some of the research. So consumers say they like to have an abundance of choices, but the research indicates otherwise. That means that if you ask your customers if they want to have a bunch of choices, the most often they may say yes, but their brain may think otherwise, because if there's too many choices, it causes friction as cognitive load, and that can overwhelm the consumer. Too few choices can also make consumers feel cheated. So the flip side is also true. While too many can cause them to feel overwhelmed, and we don't want them to feel cheated or overwhelmed, right? We don't want them to have any kind of post-decision regret. So think about this. They buy your product or service, then they try to use it and they become overwhelmed. And so then they start to wonder, did I make the right decision? And we don't want them to go backwards because of a post-sale content experience. We want them to feel good about the brand, and we want them to be evangelists eventually so that they'll tell others about the software decision they made, and maybe they'll also want to do something similar in the future. And of course, there's a lot of talk about customer experience today. This overload damages customer experiences for all the reasons you know as a customer. Here's some of the common knowledge center overload problems. Too many pieces of content, right? That's too many pages, articles, links, and images, too many videos, too many options, too many things on the screen to distract people. And that hits number two, which is kind of related to it. Features and graphic user elements are also pieces of content that the consumer is forced to deal with when they land on your Knowledge Center page. So we want to make sure that there is just enough content and not too much, and we want to limit the number of distractions that we put in their way. If they're there to find the answer to the question should probably be the dominant piece of content on the page. Additionally, many knowledge centers today use filters as a basic narrowing option to kind of find the search results that are most meaningful. And that's a great tool to have in a knowledge center. But you can have too many filters. Many retail stores try to include all kinds of filters so that you can pick the right kinds of clothing very quickly, and the right sizes and the right colors and the right styles. And before long, the filter list can seem overwhelming. So we want to make sure that when you use filters, that we use them smartly and we don't give too many options. Facets, which are filterable categories, which can help you refine searches after you've already found like a basic set of content and you want to narrow in on the target answer. Those facets can also get in the way. So what we want to do, if we move to the next slide, is we want to develop choice-focused architecture. We want to present contextually just the relevant content and features. So in order to be relevant, we're going to need to know a little bit about our audience. Who are they? What products did they buy from us? What languages do they speak? What are some of their preferences? What role do they fill at work? And if we can use choice-focused decision-making to present content that is relevant to them, we can eliminate or at least dramatically reduce choice overload, because as we talked about earlier, it's not something that enhances the customer experience. And in fact, we don't want to just strip it down to nothing either, because as we mentioned, too few choices can make consumers feel cheated or that we didn't do the work that we ought to have done for them. So those are a couple of suggestions on how you can minimize the problem of too many choices. All right, any panelists have anything to add to that? In your experience, Leah, has this held true that if you make a decision to put too many or too few things on there, can you eventually determine, wow, this might not have been our best decision? Have you ever stumbled into an issue like that?
Yes, sure. So when we initially built our knowledge center in my previous company, we didn't have we didn't have a lot of knowledge going in, and so we kind of canvassed our customers and we spoke to a lot of other parts of the organization to see what would be helpful to add to the filters, and we added a lot of filters. And then we built the portal and we looked at our analytics, which were crucial for us. And we noticed the trend over time that nobody was using the filters. They were overwhelming and there were just way too many of them. And so we became smarter and we started to take away some of the filters and tag our content a little bit more succinctly, and it worked much better.
Lovely. Steve and Amy, do you have any commentary on the too many choices angle?
Yeah, so like for me, it's just I always think about Amazon, right? The first thing I'm always doing is clicking Prime, because if you can't get it here tomorrow, I don't really need it.
I don't want it yet.
So like that's the only filter I actually need in Amazon. But seriously, you know, having that kind of experience where you're quickly getting or narrowing down to the content that's relevant to you is really important. Whether that be, you know, how can you figure out what are the kind of the high level categorizations that you can get to really, really quickly, that prime or no prime, that answer that can eliminate a large number of options very quickly. I think that's super important.
That's a really great example. And I would imagine that while there's not necessarily the prime feature on a knowledge center, there's probably a filter that means more to each individual user. And I think that's your point, is that if we understood what it was they were after, we might be able to help them by providing filters that are quick and dirty that can get them to where they need to go. Amy, I saw you nodding your head a little bit, and I think you might have something to add. How about sharing a little bit?
Yeah, the facets, the filters and facets is really a good example of what Leah was saying about having too many. That's what we found at Zoomin, is that some customers, they have so many choices that people they don't even use the facets because they're like, well, I don't even know where to begin here. So I think the Amazon example is awesome, because like Steve, I don't even look at those anymore. In the old days, I think we thought people want those choices to be able to drill down really micro, but it's too much.
And the interesting thing about the research I did on this, and I want to be clear that I didn't spend years researching this. It was a quick Google search. I read a couple of articles and books, and I watched some videos by some usability experts who have been trying to A/B test various configurations of content to see how human brains react and what do consumers think. And one of the things they said was, there's a small percentage of people who do want too much information. They are the people who say, I need all the filters. That's my thing. So minimizing the amount of filters might not mean killing them all. It might mean just not presenting a huge long list to every single person. Maybe you have to have a short list and then more, a button that will expand. But that's interesting. That's very interesting, I think, for us to think about in the future. How can we serve the needs of the information hungry who do want all of the choices without overwhelming all the people who might not, because they're just there for that quick delivery, as Steve pointed out. All right, how about let's talk about big mistake number 2. Amy, I think I'll turn this over to you and then rejoin you here after you chat about this, and we'll take some commentary from the panel.
Sure. So this is very related to what Scott was talking about in point number 1 about having too many choices. I think sometimes organizations, they'll put they'll invest in a federated search and they'll say, we're not going to, we don't have time to really, do information architecture that will be really helpful to our users. We're just going to let people search everything. Because like you were just saying, some people do want everything. Some people do want all the results.
That's right.
But when you have a federated search or search that's just going over everything, then you might end up with things that frustrating experience. So I'm thinking of an example where if I'm looking on a website for a specific answer to a technical problem and I'm expecting to find it in the official product documentation, but when I search, I get community results, I get KV articles, I get troubleshooting, I get learning content. That's all great content, but I have a specific question and I want to be able to reach that question. So like Leah was mentioning earlier, when she was working on her knowledge center, that she was saying that, trying to tag the content and make it more relevant, trying to understand users better and make the content, make the tagging system more relevant so people can use those filters and drill down and find out, what they need and have a more personalized experience. Yeah, people now really expect a personalized experience on your doc site. They don't want to be just the kitchen sink. They want to be able to get to what they need right away. And that the way to do that would be to, you really need to understand your customers better. You need to understand what they're doing there. And Leah also mentioned the analytics. She's playing right into our hands with these topics. Using analytics, understanding your customer's journey, that really helps you to be able to curate the experience so that they're not just presented, like I said, with the kitchen sink. They're just getting those specific things that they're looking for.
Interesting. Amy, is there any danger when you're, I don't think I've implemented one of these before, so I'm honestly asking your and Steve's opinion of what happens when there is kind of a search overlay dumped on top of a bunch of content. Is it also possible that the search helps you quickly identify that there's a piece of content available, but that clicking on it might take you to a different customer experience somewhere, because maybe that federated search is on top of a bunch of different experiences. So they're saying, hey, the shortcut is we'll just throw the search up there and then they can find anything. But maybe I start on one portal and I click through the search and I end up in the online community. What if I've never been to the online community before? And now I'm presented with this totally different interface. Is that also one of our concerns when we're talking about this?
Yeah, I think so. I can think of some customers that I've talked to that definitely have that experience. So when a customer comes to the site, they want the information, but they also want the consistency that they know I'm getting this from a trusted source. I have a consistent experience from end to end. I know I'm on Scott's site and I know what to expect. But like you said, if you're being taken somewhere else, you might not know how to get back. You might just get frustrated and say, well, I'm just going to go Google and then maybe somebody else will give me the answer.
Right. And maybe I won't have to set up another account or log in a different way or learn a new interface. Or by the way, maybe there's facets on one search page and then you land in a different place and there's not any filters or facets. Leah, have you experienced this problem with customers where they jump from place to place and it causes at least a temporary, frustration or confusion that could be remedied by unifying everything?
Yeah, so I definitely agree, like a uniform customer experience is crucial. And as consumers of the internet, we all have this where we end up in a place it's unfamiliar, we don't know how to use it. And so we're very, our frustration level goes up and we may not find what we want right away and we leave. So yes, I have had that experience where I've had people, users reach out to us and say, I wanted to find something. I ended up in another content repository. I didn't know what to find. I'm opening a ticket. Somebody's got to help me here. And of course, the content is as content creators, the content can be excellent. It can be amazing. It can be accurate. But if our users can't consume it, it's basically worthless.
Yeah, that's a great point. Steve, Amy had made a point that maybe some organizations choose the federated search option partially because there's a lot of work involved in reconfiguring and rethinking how you should structure and architect your content in order to deliver these great personalized experiences that consumers want. What are the kinds of things that those companies might be avoiding? And in other words, what do you really need to do in order to build a unified customer experience if you weren't going to take the search approach?
It's a great question, Scott. So I think in general, right? I mean, all of us who've been in this space for a long time know that kind of architecting your information is really critical, right? You have to understand what the entirety of your content looks like and how you want to kind of slice and dice that content based on where a customer is and what they need. And I think that by just kind of like, let's just index everything. It's kind of like the old, going back 10 years, like SharePoint, right? Oh, just put it all in SharePoint and then everything's
Right.
there and available to everybody. Good luck finding the difference between an important piece of information and a birthday calendar, but it's all there and indexed, right? So I think that it's really, upon us as information architects to really understand the customer journey, understand what the customer needs are, using our analytics to understand where our customers are clicking through, and then applying that to making sure that we're surfacing relevant content at the right time. I think it's really on us as information architects to do that.
I think so too. Amy, what else could you add to this? If a customer who's watching one of today's shows says, you know what, we're considering both of these approaches. I don't want to be the one who poo-poos enterprise search, because there's probably a use case for enterprise search that is totally appropriate. It just might not be relinquishing that responsibility to a search engine, the delivery of the right piece of content, because search is not about delivery, right? They're different things. And so can you talk to us about what's the best way that we could think about this if we need to go back and convince our boss why we shouldn't just throw it all in the kitchen sink and index it? What do we want to do, and how do we convince them that this is an option they should consider?
Yeah, I think they're, like you said, they both have a place, right? Like people, federated search or having search across everything, that's a great way. People, lots of our customers at Zoomin they want both, right? So you might have both, but then have a way for your customers to narrow down so they don't have to get it all. They can still get just parts. So you can have a federated search, but then you can also have facets to help you say, I only want product documentation, or I only want even just this manual, right? I have one customer who they specifically wanted to be able to search just in a publication instead of the whole federated search. But for the person who wants everything, you can still do it. So as far as convincing your management, I think just pointing out that there's different learning styles and different ways of consuming information. And the more you know about your customers, the better case you can make, right? So if you say, looking at the analytics, people are really not finding, like Leah said, if people can't find it, they can't use it, you might as well not write it. I mean, you can make a budget conversation about that, right? Like, why are we writing all this if no one can find it? Just demonstrating that, you understand your user and you understand that there's different ways of approaching it, I think is good.
Before we move on to big mistake number 3, I was just curious, Leah, if in your previous experiences, if you've ever run into being able to tie in a support concern to what Amy was just saying. For example, let's assume that some content's not being consumed. We created it and nobody's finding it or whatever. But you talk to the support people and they say, people call about this all the time. They're all pissed when they call. They're not happy. They're not like, oh, we love your brand. They're frustrated and they want help. Can you use this support data for kind of weaponizing your argument and then coming back to management and saying, look, you're paying us to provide this content, but people aren't able to find it. And so they don't use the computer anymore. They switch to the telephone and they call our support line, or worse, they try to find our support line that we've not made it easy for them to find a number. So then they're frustrated and they think, I just want to give up on this project. Is that a thing? Can we use that support data? And does management care about it?
Absolutely. That is, it's a huge buzzword in the market when you come and you say, I want to be able to help you reduce support tickets. And everybody goes, right. Ooh, we like that. Tell us how. Right. So yes, of course, that's a great entry point, but then actually being able to show how you can deliver it, just takes it that step further. So a big avenue we always wanted to go down was case deflection. That meaning that as the customer has already not looked for the content, and we know the content exists, they won't bother to even look at. They go straight. They do find a way to open a ticket, even though we try to hide it, and they start to open the ticket. If there is a way that brings up existing content based on the input that they put in the ticket, then they're more likely to not open the ticket. They're like, oh, that's what I was about to ask. And then they can like go straight to the content, and it avoids opening tickets. So that, you know, it's so important that we integrate our content, that we speak to support, and we find a way to do this case deflection.
So I think what you're suggesting is just before the person is able to connect with support by starting a ticket or something of that nature, it would be great if we could say, wait a minute, I know you're frustrated and you're trying to find an answer. And could you type in a few words about what it is that you're trying to find? And maybe we could surface up an answer for you. But what happens if that doesn't happen? Should we be connecting our content to the support center too, so the support center knows when they answer the phone that, oh, Diane's been searching for X, Y, and Z, and here, you know, it's a problem. Our support people maybe in an island to themselves sometimes, and so they're not always integrated in the way that makes the most sense for us.
Yeah,
to
so
deliver
integrating
on the
your
promise.
content silos is extremely important, whether it's support or any other content creators in the community, in your environment that is creating content that's customer facing. That integration is hugely important. Breaking down those silos is hugely important. So we did it in a number of ways. In my previous company, we started by at least being able to index the support KBs that were being created by support, and then surfacing them up in the same search in our knowledge center, so that our users would know that there are answers, whether the answer was created by the technical documentation team or by the support. They don't care. They just need the answers. So it was bringing that content to them in the environment that they were in. But really, the better solution is to have that content surface in wherever the customer is. If the customer is in your knowledge center, they should be able to access the answers that exist in the knowledge center or in your support center. But if they are in your support center, likewise, they should be able to find the answers from your knowledge center and your support center. So that integration is crucial.
That makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense. Thank you for sharing that. All right, let's move on to big mistake number 3. And I believe this is Steve's bailiwick. Steve, tell us a little bit about the mistake that you've identified. Okay. Can we see the slide? I see Steve is sharing, but I don't see the slide. Steve, maybe could you unshare and then share again? Let's see.
I think we've just learned a lesson on how to use Zoom and not.
That'll be a webinar for the future. Okay,
Hopefully
big
we're
mistake
back
number 3.
in real life. That was exciting.
It was definitely
I
scary.
quickly brought my Zoom right back up, but thank you, Scott. Just wanted to talk a little bit about like making your visitors jump from site to site. So one of the things that I think is really important is giving the users access to the content where the user needs it, right? So if I'm in the middle of working with the product and I have an in-product help that can give me the answer to my question, that has access to all of those silos of information, whether it be a knowledge article, tech doc, a marketing white paper, whatever that piece may be, I want to surface that content right in the moment that the user has a content need. So let me give you an example of when that doesn't work well. So if I go off to Google and I go search for something for an answer, how many of you have seen where your competitors are buying Google AdWords for important search terms on your product? So I'm a user, I'm stuck on something, I go to Google, I search for that answer, and I get the first top 3 answers in AdWords are actually competitor sites. Like, that's the last thing I want to do is in the moment of frustration of the customer, send them off to a competitor's site, right? Probably not a great idea. But the other thing is just being able to answer that question quickly lets me get back to the work that I should be focused on, which is doing whatever the task is that I'm in the product to do. Jumping off to Google and doing a search, I don't know about you, maybe it's just me. Next thing you know, I'm looking at puppies, and 20 minutes later, I have no idea what happened, but here we are, right? So put that content exactly where the customer needs it. And then the other piece is surface the right content when the user needs it, right? So not only where they need it, but when they need it. All those pieces kind of fit together. So if I'm in a customer journey and I'm just in a buying cycle and I'm just trying to understand a little bit more about a product and just kind of get high level understanding about the product, that's a very different place than I'm a developer. I've used this product for 3 years and I just want to get to this one API command. And I can't remember what all of the JSON looks like for the post command. And I just want to get that one piece of relevant content, right? So I'm in a different buying cycle and I'm in a different place, and I should have a different experience with the content because you know who I am, you know my role, you know my persona, and you can put that information right in front of me as it's relevant to me. And then finally, using kind of a single sign-on approach, I think is super critical. User entitlements and access privileges, a lot of that is stored within a single sign-on system, or like maybe within your Salesforce or within an Okta. You know a lot about that customer, and you want to make sure that you're leveraging the information that you know about that customer to give them a more relevant content experience. If I own your a light product of the like a freemium version, maybe it would be a good idea to surface some of the premium version content to encourage me to use features that I'm not entitled to. That gives you an upsell, right? And now I can look at that from both as a user, I want to make sure that I'm only seeing the stuff that I'm entitled to, but as a software company owner, I might want to give people a glimpse of other pieces of content. I might want to differentiate between a customer, a partner, and employee. Like, so as a customer, I have access to some information. As a partner, I have access to probably more information. As an employee, I have access to a lot of information. So I want to make sure that I surface all the content, but that I protect and differentiate between users and partners and employees. And then finally, that personalized relevant information, knowing who I am, knowing what I searched for last time, knowing what my click path was last time, knowing where I was in maybe a walkthrough getting started guide, and remembering that I'm on step 5 so that I don't have to go remember for myself because I got distracted with puppies. Like, those are all really, really important pieces to make sure that you keep your customer, site visitors right in that one place, and that you provide the experience for them in that place. I just wanted to touch on, there was a question in the panel about, like, how do you, Moshe, I think you asked, how do you make sure that you're exposing all this stuff to Google as well? Scott's going to hit on that in a moment when he starts to talk about some Google snippets. I think it's super important that you have a both scenario here. You need to have a search engine within the content, within that knowledge center, that gives you relevant, quick access, that's surfacing both on relevancy and click patterns to make sure that you're surfacing the right content. But you also want to expose all that content to the robots like Google that are crawling your content and providing those indexes, as those are very relevant places. At Zoomin, we've seen customers greatly improve their search engine optimization based on just kind of exposing single versions of content and all kinds of other tricks that we have up our sleeves to make sure that we're giving that search engine experience that everyone's looking for. So
I would say that big mistake number 3 definitely is important. And I've seen that you've wrapped a few things in here. Can you help customers who are watching today's show who might not understand exactly what we mean by single sign-on? What's a single sign-on, and is that a Zoomin thing, or is that something external to Zoomin?
Thanks, Scott. So single sign-on is that thing that when you log into your Okta in the morning, and it automatically authenticates you into all the sites the rest of the day. That's that single sign-on experience. I only have to sign on once, and the rest of the day just goes really smoothly. When you reboot your computer and you have to log into all those things all over again, that's why you want to have that single sign-on. So some people use something like Okta. You can use Google single sign-on. I mean, there's 1,000 different providers out there that do that.
And those providers, technology integrates with the Zoom In platform in a way that would support the notion of a unified single sign-on.
Right. And even back to that in-product help example, right? If I'm already authenticated in your product, you've already got, you know who I am. You've authenticated me. I want to use that same login and just automatically pass them into the content stream because I know who you are and I know that you've authenticated yourself.
Excellent. In the interest of time, I'm going to ask a couple quick questions. Leah, I wanted to see if you have ever thought about this notion of separating partners, customers, and employees. Is there also a need to maybe separate by role the employees? In other words, putting them all in one bucket sounds like a good idea, but what if you work for a financial institution and there's a security department, and then there's also the employees? The security they are employees, but they need to know some stuff because they monitor employees to make sure that there's no theft or corporate, espionage going on in their company. They may need to see and have access to information that you wouldn't want every single employee to see. And that may be true with management information or HR information. Is there a reason to kind of subdivide those groups of employees by role so that we can deliver up role-based content?
Yes, so there's multiple reasons for role-based content. First of all, as you say, you want to partition your content so that the right people are given access to the right content that they should be seeing. But even more than that, I would say you want to partition your content so that you're serving up the right content to the users that are meant to see them. So on one hand, it is security that, you may not want to expose all your internal content to every user that enters your site. But I would take it even a step further. It's a way to push content, to deliver content to your users that is really relevant for them.
And is that because when we delineate the content and we make it more granular, we give each piece an identity, and then we say, oh, this piece would be appropriate for this particular role, and then we divvy up the people by role, we can easily use the power of a delivery platform like Zoom In to say, when you encounter a person with this role, it's more than likely they'll want content associated with their role. And so let's start by serving up that content first in an attempt to be useful.
Yes, and I would go back to Steve's point about single sign-on. You could tie this in with your user roles based on how they are authenticated. So let's say you have customers that have user credentials for your customer portal, and they use the same customer credentials in your knowledge center. So then they are authenticated as a customer, and then they can go straight to their customer content.
Oh, I see. Yeah, and that seems like a very nice thing to do, right? For the user to eliminate the frustration of trying to figure out, oh no, how do I log in over here? Amy, what could you add to this particular topic that Steve brought up?
I think being able to differentiate content by role internally or for external users is a key to making your content experience extremely personal. Is very powerful. At one of my companies, we had certain internal documentation that was just for support. So, for example, like we wanted to be able to use content from single source and to be able to have certain articles that maybe had more confidential information just for the support team to look at. So if they got a call, they could look that up, and we didn't have to have two different knowledge centers. We could just have one knowledge center. And then also if you had a case of, I think one of you mentioned maybe, something that's management related, say you want to have just docs about certain management policies, then being able to have the role-based makes your knowledge center much more versatile than if you have to go into Confluence for this and you have to go to Salesforce for this. If you've got it all in one place.
Excellent. All right, so we're going to move on to big mistake number 4. But before we do, we're going to share the screen here for just a second. But we're going to ask you to take poll number 2 right now. I'm going to learn a little bit more about you before we tell you about big mistake number 4. So if our webinar producer would put the poll up for the audience. I'll read the question aloud here and we'll talk a little bit about the results. So are you currently leveraging XML to publish your content to multiple output formats? Please pick one answer, yes, no. What is XML, or I don't know. which is a perfectly fine answer. By the way, if you don't know, we don't mind if you choose, I don't know. So if you're using XML to publish your content, which is the extensible markup language, please let us know. All right, let's take a look at the results real quickly. So it looks like over half of the audience members today are definitely using XML to produce content. That's great because this next suggestion will be very relevant to you. For those of you that are not, I'm hoping to convert you. And for those that say, what is XML? That's a totally different webinar, but I'm happy to say Google that. Just to start, and we'll be happy to do a show in the future that will help you with that as well. Okay, so big mistake number 4 in my view is failing to use structured data. So structured data is a method of marking up your content so that machines can process it and do things with it. Amongst the group of 51% of you who said that you use XML to produce your content today, you're probably using XML for publishing to help you get done faster, on time, and produce multiple deliverables in multiple formats. And that's a great thing. But you might be missing an opportunity to mark up your content so search engines can better understand it and can help you serve up the right answer to the right person in a web browser. So let's move on to the next slide, and I'll give you some suggestions here. So here's some things you can do. There's a website known as schema.org, which you can look up all of the different markup languages that are open standards and available to anyone to use for any reason. One of the markups that Google will reward you for using is called Frequently Asked Questions Markup. It is a markup that allows you to explicitly tell Google that your content is the answer to a question. So frequently asked questions usually provide one single answer from one single source. And so this markup tells Google, hey, I'm company A, and my customers are asking this question, and this is the answer from company A. And if you mark up your content with that, Google will be able to crawl your website and see that you've declared, this is a question we believe our customers are asking, and this is our official answer. When Google sees that information, they can, now I'm not going to tell you they will always do this, but they can say, their algorithm can say, I trust that as is the appropriate answer, and serve it up on the search engine results page. Now, what does this mean? That means that when people give up and they can't find an answer on your website, or they just decide they're not going to go to your website at all, they're just going to start with Google, they could put in a question about your product, and Google may serve up the answer on the search engine results page, near the top of the page. So you're not paying for it, it's not an advertisement, and Google's not promising to do this, but because you've marked up the content, the search engine's algorithm will see it and maybe think of it as a more trustworthy content and provide the answer to your customer. Now, some marketing people poo-poo this idea because they would like us to provide the answer on Google so that people click the link and land on our website. But in reality, the customer really only wants the answer, and we've already talked about the convenience factor here. So adding this kind of markup is appropriate when you want to be able to surface the answer in a search engine. Now, there's a second kind of markup that we'll talk about on the next slide, and that's called how-to markup. So every one of your processes and procedures is a numerical step that walks users through how to successfully complete a task can also be marked up, whether it's in video or in text. And if you do that using the schema.org how-to markup, Google may see that as the answer to how do I do something. And if someone comes to the Google search engine and types in, how do I do this thing with XYZ product, and your company makes XYZ product, and your company marks up the instructions with how to markup, Google may, as the image shows you on the screen, show you the steps, step by step, on how to actually do the thing that you want to do. And if you fill out the markup and you actually are complying with the markup standard, it will tell the user how many steps and how long it might take to actually accomplish that task. All very useful things for people. Now, it turns out that when people find these things, they're happy because they got the answer to the question, especially if the answer is correct. But they also sometimes are curious and they will click through sometimes to your website. So it's not like you're going to banish people from your website by doing this. Instead, what you're doing is serving up the right answers wherever the customer might be. And when they're with Google, you don't want them to be frustrated that they can't find anything. You want to show them that you thought about this in advance, and that there's a answer to the question anywhere that they are, including in the Google search engine. All right, and if we'll go to the next slide, we're going to talk now, I believe, with Amy about big mistake number 4. And in the trying to be quick about this and make sure we leave enough time for questions, I would like to suggest to our audience members, if you've got a question about anything that we've already talked about or some other topic, please use the chat room to submit a question and we'll answer as many as possible with the time remaining. All right, so back up a little bit. We're going to go to big mistake number 4. We're on 5 right now. There we go. All right, and we're going to let, if we go back maybe one more. Nope, sorry, big mistake number 4. All right, back up one more. Sorry about that. Amy, talk to us about big mistake number 4.
I think I'm actually big mistake number 5, right?
Oh, I think so too. Sorry, this
Okay,
slide
sorry.
got misnumbered. Let's back up for just a second and let me
Okay.
finish up that
Okay.
mislabeled slide. So the solution to your problem, if you are trying to give people access to the content in a search engine, is to mark up your content in accordance with the schema.org structured data standards and ensure that your content follows Google guidelines. All those things are available. There's a tool called the Google Rich Results Test that you can actually run on your content to make sure that you've done it right. And there's also a URL inspection tool. So it'll crawl the URL and tell you whether or not that content is provided in accordance with the Google guidelines. Google can also be asked to recrawl your content. So once you've marked up all your content with structured data standards, you can actually submit a request for Google to recrawl your Knowledge Center content, and it will re-index that content. Okay, big mistake number 4, which is labeled number 5, but we're going to just pretend that it says 4, is Amy. All right, failing to understand why users use the site. Amy, talk to us about that.
Yeah, so I think, as we've talked about a couple times in other topics, understanding your user is key to having useful documentation and having a useful website. I think sometimes, though, even if we do all the research and we look into everybody's use cases, there's still going to be that percentage of people who have a specific use case, or they have something very specific that they want. So one of the things that I really like about Zoom In, for example, is the ability to have a collection, or we call it My Docs or a My Collection.
I applaud that.
Yeah, so it's your own little way of making a manual or making a curated collection of content. So I think no matter how much you know about your customer, there could always be, and Steve gave this example earlier when we were talking about this, you might have an admin who every single week they have to do a certain procedure, and they want to keep all of the topics, in a little collection so that they can do that. I, as a writer, I don't necessarily know this person exists or that this use case exists, but this person has the freedom now to put together my content in a way that's helpful to them. Then the best part is then they can share that with other people. So say you went on vacation, you could say, here, I'm going to share my collection with you. Here's the topics I use every week. And then also it's important for the content to be dynamically updated. So whenever I, as a writer, update the topic, the collection is also updated. So it's different than, saving a PDF. When you save a PDF, that information is instantly stale. Sorry, not instantly. I'm a little biased against PDFs, but that information is going to be stale soon. So to have a dynamic, refreshing content, then that makes it really easy for your customer. So even if you do understand, their use cases, that gives that little flexibility to your user to be able to use your content however they want to use it.
And Leah, this seems like kind of touching on the point you were making earlier about the silos. If we're able to share this content with others, that means that when we bring on new employees, we might be able to have the existing employee who's leaving share their My content with the person who's going to take over their role. And so it will become their content. Do you see that as a valuable addition, being a manager?
Absolutely. So I think Amy raised a very good point. We do a lot of research to understand who we are writing for, who our consumers are. But, you know, there are use cases that we might not even think of. So being able to put together these collections and then to hand them over to somebody else who might need it exactly the way we need it is very, very valuable. It's a great way also to onboard new employees, that you have someone in a particular role and you're mentoring them, you're training them, you've already done the research, you've created your collection, and now as part of your training them or onboarding them, you can say, listen, there's a lot of content out here. I've created a collection just for you that's going to help you in your role.
And one more question before we move on to the last big mistake with Steve. Do you feel like maybe there's also some value in having the support team be able to use the same knowledge repository and build a collection for a customer, so that they say to the customer who might have called in on the phone, I went ahead and I packaged up all these articles in a nice little container that I can share with you. And if you would like, I can send you a link to that. I think that just seems like a really obvious way to use this.
Yeah, that's a great example that you used. And we actually heard about a case like that recently, where we were told, you know, we get a huge amount of questions asked around a certain procedure, and that procedure is something that lives in various different documents because they touch upon different parts of the product. It wouldn't make sense to have packaged that particular use case as one use case, because they are part of they're different parts of the product. But our users want to be able to access this particular use case. So what we did, or what they did, what support did, was they created a collection of the various topics from different publications that would walk the customer through this particular use case.
Lovely. All right. Well, thank you for sharing that, Leah. I love it when it's a real world example. Audience members, if you had any questions for us, you can submit one in the chat room. I did have a question from the audience, so I'll go ahead and throw it this way and say, I know we were going to talk about 5 big mistakes, and I apologize for our little numbering snafu there. Steve, I realized that was supposed to be your point, I think, number 5 as well. Do you have anything to add to it on the customer journey topic related to that?
Too many choices, right? If you have too many choices, it's too many. Should have done 3. There's only 3 things. No, I have nothing to add. but I think it's a great example of like how your mind over just 50 minutes, there's a lot that we're all juggling in our head all the time. And the more choices that we give people, the more confusion, the more opportunity to fail that we present. And I think that it's almost like we planned it or something, Scott.
Almost. I'd like to take credit for that, but I don't think I was thinking that far ahead today. So here's a question from an audience member. Should we be building an answer engine for everyone, not just for people we expect to come to our websites? In other words, they wanted to know, shouldn't we be creating answers for the people who are new employees, for the people who are changing jobs in our own company, because won't they need to pretty much have access to the same kinds of information? And if we wrote it in a way that was appropriate and tagged it, could we do that? So I guess the bigger question is, should we create a search engine, a knowledge portal that allows the answers to all the questions about products to be answered, not just consumer focused ones?
That's a great question. And we're starting to see a lot of that today, where customers are coming to us and asking for help in actually employee focused knowledge centers, right? So where it's really a whole bunch of knowledge articles and the knowledge content, and collecting all of that information is just as important inside as it is outside. In fact, on the inside, we have access to a lot more things, like maybe we have access to Confluence pages that we don't ever expose outside. But who's indexing Confluence to make sure that it's tied in with the tech doc and the knowledge articles and all that information in one little place? So we are seeing that trend over the last probably 3 to 6 months, where there's just, as we're maybe in the last couple of years, as we're all much more dispersed than we have been previously,
Sure.
There's a need for content to be collected and curated in a way that can be kind of shared outside of the silo. So I think that's a really it's a great observation.
Leah, as a manager, what do you think about that? Do you see some utility in it? I mean, if we're going to invest in the technology and in tagging and structuring our content so that we can serve up the right answer, when we want to serve up the right product answer to whomever needs it and use the knowledge portal kind of as a one size fits all place to come, but with the understanding that we're going to give an individualized experience to each person the best that we can.
It's a great idea. I hadn't really thought it through before that question. It did come up for me before, where again we were trying to break apart the silos, and both, as Steve said, for our external users and our internal users, who were all looking for content across the organization. So, you know, if it could be in the same place, if there is one pane of glass, one source of truth that could bring up all of this content, regardless of who the user is, that would be ideal.
I think understanding the customer journey is really important there, right? Because if we're going to have some of this content that's multiple purpose content, for example, if I'm going to explain how a feature works to a customer, but then a new employee comes on board, I might have to explain it to them, but I might explain it in a slightly different way. So I might have to write two variations of that, which is where structured content would come in handy, because you could tag one appropriate for employee disclosure and the other for customer disclosure. One of our customers watching today's show would like to know of Leah, how many filters were too many, and how did you finally settle on a number?
That's a great question. So there's no like defined number that I would say, oh, 10 is too many and 5 is not enough. I think you have to just really know your content, and you have to know your customers. And really, like, if you're looking at it from the perspective of you're a consumer yourself. Every day you're looking for information. Think how you would want to look for something and how you would want to search for it, and then look at it and then turn it around and view it from your customer's perspective. So you know your product, you know who your users are, and you start asking the questions. If I'm the customer, I would want, how do I do this? How do I find this? How do I learn about X? And then you kind of narrow down what filters you would need to be able to answer those questions and take them straight to the answer. So there's no like definite answer of what's too many or what's too little. You have to really know your customers, but definitely too many is overwhelming. If you have to start scrolling through filters and filters and filters, even if they're categorized, you're going to lose the edge of having the filters right away.
Excellent. And our last question is probably going to be directed more toward me, although any of you can chime in if you'd like while we have a couple minutes left. My company's help site, our viewer says, is behind a login, so it does not appear in Google searches, and that does happen sometimes. Besides consistency, what are some of the benefits of adopting structured data? So I would tell you that structured data is a very specific vocabulary word, and you might want to start by Googling structured content to find out what some of the benefits might be. And as a shameless plug for myself, I will tell you that with Anne Rockley and Charles Cooper, I wrote a book called Intelligent Content, a Primer, which is available from XML Press, a company that specializes in making books for technical communicators and other information developers. It's a small, short book that will tell you all about the value of structured content. Just briefly, structured content is modular, granular, it's semantically rich, which means it has meaning that computers and machines can understand, and it's designed for repurposing. It's not designed to just be a one-off piece of content. There's a lot of thought behind it, and it is described in such a way with metadata that a system like Zoomin or other software products that understand this metadata can act upon it, which means you can make rules about your content. Show me all the content that is for this role. Don't show content that is for this role. Filter that content, sort it alphabetically. Make me a list of all the people that are in my database, because if you mark up a person as a person, you can actually ask the computer questions of your content. So there's a lot of different benefits, and it would take too much time to explain in our 1 minute remaining. So I'd have to say that'll be the best answer I can give you in 30 seconds, but definitely Google structured content. You can even take a look at the contentwrangler.com. There's some articles from the past by consultants and other experts that are much more knowledgeable than I am about the nitty-gritty of structured data. I appreciate that. Let's take our last polling question here today to see how we did. If our polling assistant can display the poll. All right, how would you rate today's session? You've got choices on the screen. Bad, you didn't learn anything new. Boy, I hope we didn't hit that one too many times. Just okay, knew most of what was discussed today. Fine, I learned some things to think about. Good. Now I know what I need to do next. Or fantastic, I'm excited about the possibilities. All right, we're not going to be able to share the results here with you, I think, but I wanted to thank you for participating in today's show. And thanks to all the guests. Thanks, Amy. Thanks, Leah. Thanks, Steve. I really appreciate you being so flexible and jumping around with us. And to the audience members who joined us today, thank you as well. If you'd like to learn more about Zoomin software, you can do so on the web at zoominsoftware.com. If you need to bring all of your product information together in one place, I can highly recommend that you check out Zoomin. It can handle structured, unstructured content and all kinds of different information products. And every day they're growing their platform and doing more exciting things, including providing you the ability to see how your content performs and make decisions about it based on analytics. I'm Scott Abel. Thanks for joining us today for the webinar. Everybody have a great day. See you soon.
Thank you.